question that I asked this week was, what if I told you you could change the world? What if I told you you could change the world? Nobody's jumping up and down in excitement, huh? Maybe you don't believe me. All right, so let's rephrase the question. What if I told you what you did this week would change the world? Then what? Elizabeth's giving me that face like, yeah, okay, I hear you, Pastor Cindy, but I really don't believe what you're saying. How many of you believe that same thing? All right, I see a couple hands. Yeah, all right, Cindy. Tell us more. What are you talking about? How can I change the world? I'm only one person. Isn't that oftentimes what we think? One of the things that was going through my head when I pull up my Facebook this week and I see these people all over the place with this ALS challenge. It's amazing to see. And then when you dump the ice water over your head, I didn't tell you this part, you are supposed to challenge 3 other people. And so that's how everything grows. What you do affects the life of somebody else, but you also pass that on to some other people. Well, in our story today, I didn't tell them this, but Rita and Emma had the most important parts. Well, not really. All the women, other than David, had really important parts in our story today. But I'm going to talk about Shiphrah and Puah at the beginning for a little while anyway. They had an important part in our story today because what they did affected hundreds of thousands of lives. And I don't think that by saying no to the Pharaoh, they realized what they were going to do or what they were doing was going to have that effect on so many people. In fact, I don't think when we go through about our lives, what we do, we think is going to have so much effect on other people's lives. And so that's why I'm bringing them up today. I think that they have a lot to tell us about how we can be the change in the world. Because the beginning of Exodus really starts on this chilling note. We've got this Pharaoh, this evil king, who is so threatened by the Israelites, by these people that are different from him, that he decides to kill them. Right? I mean, how heartless is that? To order all baby boys to be killed. Well, in step in the 2 midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and what do they say? Not a rhetorical question, you can answer. What do they say to the king? No, yeah, well, they don't really come out and say no to the king. It's a little hard to say no to a king, right? And I'm sure some of you can think about people in your lives that are pretty hard to say no to, right? Maybe a boss, maybe a spouse or a significant other, maybe a child. Sometimes it's hard for us to say no. So they're a little bit more devious. I don't know, what's a good word choice?
I like subtle.
You like subtle? All right, Emma. They're a little bit more subtle. They don't follow the king's orders. They let the babies live. Maybe it would break their hearts. I mean, these are women who deliver babies for their livelihood, bringing life into the world. Maybe when they look and they gaze down into that baby's face, there's no way that in their hearts they could take a life. So what do? They realize maybe it would be better if the king kills us instead of these babies. So they go back to the king when the king calls for them, and they tell the king. They make up this excuse. They say, well, the reason we're not killing these babies is these Israelite women, they're just so vigorous. They give birth before the midwives can even get there. And so, by their very small act of defiance, they changed the world. And like I said earlier, I don't think that they set out to change the world. I don't think that they said, all right, by our decision here today, gosh darn it, we're going to make a difference, and we're going to change the world. It was just part of who they were. Just like or beloved children of God, that you claim that identity. You are God's beloved. And because of that, you have the power to change the world. You might not know that. You might not even believe it. But this week, I bet you're going to at least be thinking about it. And thinking about how what you do has an effect on the people around you. And that's why the title of the sermon today is called The Butterfly Effect. Because there's an author by the name of Andy Andrews who wrote a book called The Butterfly Effect. And it catalogs the extraordinary impact of what our normal, everyday decisions have on other people. And he says when you look back, you never really know which decision it was that you made that has that effect on somebody else. For instance, he gives an example. Norman Borlaug. Anybody ever heard of Norman Borlaug? No? All right. Well, he developed a high-yield, disease-resistant corn and wheat that was credited for saving the lives of 2 billion people from famine. You know who gave him the job to do that? Henry Wallace. You know him? One-term vice president who created an office in New Mexico to develop hybrid seed for arid climates, and he hired Borlaug to run it. Or maybe we should credit George Washington Carver. Anybody know that name? Yeah, who took young Henry Wallace for long walks to instill in him a love of plants. Or maybe we should credit Susan and Moses Carver, who adopted the orphan George in as their son. Or maybe we should, I think you kind of get the picture. It's kind of like that ALS challenge. Or those commercials, gosh, from back in the 1970s about the conditioner. I can't remember what it was, but you know, you put the conditioner in and you love it so much that you tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends and so on and so on. That's the butterfly effect. We have teachers sitting in this room. Not necessarily teachers that teach in schools, but teachers that teach children. Teachers that teach each other. What you do might change somebody's life. In the way that you are the hands and feet of Christ, in the way that you go out, you might be changing the world and not even know it. In the way you share your love with your spouse, or your boss, or those people that are so hard to love. Maybe just by offering them a kind smile, or inviting them to lunch. You might not know. Being kind to a student might be kind to another student who maybe is having a rough day and might have thought, today's the day I'm just going to take my own life. Because of what you did affects somebody else, that affects somebody else, that affects somebody else. Maybe you'll believe what you hear today, and you'll go out and you'll try to make a difference in the world. Not that long ago, the Sunday school, we're taught about something called ARCs, Acts of Random Kindness. Do you remember that? And Jody, and Lauren, and Miranda, Christopher, Elizabeth, just a few people, a handful of people, decided to make it their mission to go out and do something nice for someone else. You never know what your decision today and how your decision today will affect somebody else. You will change the world. And so, the things that we do this week, your actions, your choices, your decisions, will ripple out into consequences that you might know and consequences that you might not know. Sometimes they might work out for good, sometimes not for good, sometimes for health, sometimes our consequences might damage. The question isn't whether, the question is what. What will you do this week that will make a difference in the world? Some of you might do big, bold, courageous things. And others of you might do small, tiny, little things. And yet, they'll have the potential to ripple out and to affect so many more lives than you can even begin to understand. In today's reading, it's Shipra and Pua, affecting countless lives. Who knows who it will be this week, this month, this year? What would you do if I told you you could change the world? Amen.